oil is discovered in certain parts of the Middle East, most people live in total destitution. The discoveries and enlightenments of Europe largely passed the Muslim world by. This shouldn't be exaggerated. Certain parts of the Muslim world, of course, give the Western world certain parts of what becomes the Western European tradition. So there were times of interplay. There were times of mutual learning.
Why do I love him so much?
One is, of course, that Muhammad, the founder of Islam, himself beheaded, massacred many, many Jews. Famously, there's one battle in particular, and the Banu Quraysh. It's a story you can find in the Quran and the Hadith. Of course, this is because the Jews would not accept the revelation of Muhammad,
and thank God for that.
Such as it was. And so they were seen within Islamic tradition as being one of the first people who turned down the opportunity to join Islam.
Why would we turn down the opportunity to join a religion that likes to behead people?
And as a result, of course, Muhammad decapitated hundreds and hundreds of Jews. So that's not a good start. But there's a bigger thing, I think, within the Muslim world, which is worth mentioning, which the late Bernard Lewis pointed out on a number of occasions, which is the great problem within Islam when it comes to not just Judaism, but the wider non-Islamic world, is that the Muslim religion claims to be the last revelation from God to man, which, as we all know, is a very large claim to make. It says there have been previous revelations, but this is the last and final one. And what's more, God has given you a book, the Quran. And the Quran is the one book you need. The opening, here is the book wherein is no doubt, which is quite a bold claim as well, I'd say. But the claim at the foundation of Islam is, here is the book wherein is no doubt, and it's the only book you need. And it's the final word from God that man will ever have. Now, if you are the recipients of this book, the people who end up either converting or being forced to convert to Islam, and eventually the areas that Islam takes over by force, if you are somebody who's brought up in that tradition, you would think that being the recipient of the final revelation from God, you would be in a just tip-top situation. You know, you would imagine that, well, this is going very well. We've got the final revelation from God. What's not to like? What's not on our side? And then several things happen in the millennia since, which is, first of all, many, many Muslims realize that despite having the final revelation from God, things don't seem to be going very well. Until oil is discovered in certain parts of the Middle East, most people live in total destitution. The discoveries and enlightenments of Europe largely passed the Muslim world by. This shouldn't be exaggerated. Certain parts of the Muslim world, of course, give the Western world certain parts of what becomes the Western European tradition. So there were times of interplay. There were times of mutual learning. And now, of course, everyone looks back at them, or many people look back at those times with nostalgia. Nevertheless, in the main, the Muslim world cut itself off from the rest of the world and didn't care to learn from the rest of the world, didn't improve the economic conditions of its people, totally failed to create societies anything like as successful as, for instance, European societies. And therein a question arises, which is, if we are the recipients of the final revelation, why is everything so awful where we live? And then you have the additional thing, which is, and how come the Jews return or re-establish of course, many Jews are already living in the area that's now Israel, but already lived there, but many others come from other parts of the world, including from the Middle Eastern countries where they're chucked out by the governments in 48 and so on. The Muslim world sees this tiny, tiny bit of land, which, among other things, is the only bit of the Middle East that doesn't have any oil. And they make of it a much more successful country than any of the countries around. Now, if you create a Palestinian state, you just have another failed Arab state, another failed Muslim state to add to the more than 50 already failed Muslim and Arab states. What is the explanation that the Jews who refused the Prophet's invitation to Islam are still here, have this tiny bit of land, and make all of these discoveries and other things that show themselves to be so successful? It's some kind of stab in the heart And instead of saying, we're doing this wrong, the thing is, the Jews are doing something right, and that must mean that they've rigged the game. That's why they care, among other things. And it leads to the deep pathology of anti-Semitism, which has been largely eradicated in Europe among Europeans, not entirely, but largely. There are still some bits of the far right you can find across Europe, and occasionally in the UK with a sort of the whiff of this noxious thing still emerges. On the left, of course, it's much closer to the boat. But principally anti-Semitism in our own day, of the kind that we hoped had ended with Hitler, exists and indeed thrives in the Muslim world. And the Muslim world is now in our world in Europe, and so we have the Hitlerian horrors of anti-Semitism back.
Yes, correct. This is such an integral part of the entire understanding of anti-Semitism, which is at the basis of this, the basis of the hatred towards us from Christians, people like Candace, but also from the Arabs, from the Muslims, is a religious hatred. Okay? People don't like to see people succeed, and they cannot wrap their head around the fact that the Jewish people are still the true ones, are still the ones that God gave the book to originally, and we are still the chosen people. See, people like in Christianity that agree to this and understand this and have joined us so that they can have what they hope to be is their bright future, they succeed and they flourish. But the people who come against us and the people who hate us just consistently lose. It's so integral that this is a religious fight. And at the root of us being the Jewish people and us owning the land of Israel, it means and it shows to the Muslims that they are in fact wrong, that their book is wrong, that their claims are wrong. And they can't look at the Jewish people and say, oh, what are they doing right? How do we connect to that? How do we have a part in what they're succeeding in? Instead, it makes them realize that they have something wrong and they just refuse to accept that. You know, they say there's two ways to be successful. One is to try your hardest to climb to the top. And the other is to make sure that you bring everybody around you down so that you can be higher. And that's exactly what they try and do. Instead of accepting that they are failing at something and trying to figure out how they can learn from the best so that they can be better, they are trying to remove us and step on us instead of accepting the fact that they have no excuses for their failed states. They have no excuses for everything that's going on. They could just build something amazing. They must tear Israel down so that they can feel better about themselves. That is the root psychological cause of Islamic hatred of the Jewish people. We disprove their book. We disprove the idea of Muhammad, and Israel is a constant thorn in their back and a reminder of this fact. That's why radical Islam tries to come after us first, because if they can't win in Israel, then their theory, their want to take over the world just will never happen, and they know that. It's interesting because they could have just circumvented Israel and gone straight to the West, and they probably would have been successful because the West loves them for some reason. Europe has accepted them. They could dominate there, but yet they hyper-focus on Israel because we are the thing that disproves them. And until they can beat us, which will never happen, they are going to realize that they don't actually have a chance and their book is incorrect and their entire war is incorrect. And that's why they come after the Jewish people continuously.